Joining me now is Danielle DiMartino Booth. She is the CEO and the Chief Strategist at the Quill Intelligence Research. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Great to be here in person.
Yeah, we did this a year ago, and it is a momentous day. Mr. Trump is now president once again, so Trump 2.0. Trump 1.0, we saw the deficit and debt go up. Will it be the same this time, do you think?
Well, I think that having control of the Senate, and even though there's a razor-thin margin in the House of Representatives, still having control of the House of Representatives means that the one thing that we will see will be the extension of the 2017 tax cuts. So that alone we know is going to cost about $4.5 trillion, $500 billion immediately, kind of coming in 2026. So, but I do think that there's unity within the Republican Party, that they're going to come together and extend those tax cuts. So I think that will happen. It won't be inflationary by any stretch. It will just prevent a negative shock.
All right. So after 4 years, you don't see the debt going up?
Oh, I certainly think that debt is on a trajectory to go up. I also think that incoming Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is very calm, very articulate, very goals-oriented, and even if he doesn't get to his goal of 3% by the end of 2028 for deficit as a percentage of GDP, it was 6.4% in fiscal year 2024. Even if he doesn't completely cut it in half, I do think that he is going to achieve some reduction in deficit spending.
Okay, fair enough. He seems like a very bright guy, very accomplished, former hedge fund guy.
He was under fire in front of the Senate Finance Committee, and he was not ruffled at all.
That's key. So as far as tariffs, you're saying that the first time around, we saw a lag in inflation, and so much consternation about what Trump's going to do this time around. What are you expecting?
Well, I think, again, listening to Bessent, and Bessent wants to be more carrot, less stick. He wants to give American manufacturers the opportunity to take a few years, take 2 years, and I'll give you that time to redo your supply chain. Come on home. But I'll give you that grace period. And like Trump 1.0, I think that the tariffs that are rolled out pretty quickly, he's already stepped back on that just today and said, oh, I'm not going to do the tariffs on day one like I said I was. I'm just going to set up a commission to study tariffs, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do. So, but I do think that they'll be overly directed towards China and hopefully not towards Canada. But there are, as we're meeting, the country of Mexico has already announced that it's lined up an army of lawyers to prepare itself in the event that these tariffs are rolled out. Right. So, and for that matter, 3 different federal government employee unions representing hundreds of thousands of government workers have already filed a lawsuit against the Department of Government Efficiency on the grounds that it violates the very idea of checks and balances, because it's not an entity that is inside the U.S. government by election or part of the Supreme Court. So it's fascinating to see that the gloves are already on. Yeah. And the people who are being targeted are not going to just sit back.
Right. Could get messy. Now, as far as the Fed, they're focused on inflation. They've actually incorporated into their calculus what tariffs may do, immigration policies as well.
Set placeholders, but those placeholders have already moved today.
Yeah.
Because he didn't roll anything out immediately. So the placeholders have just moved. And I'm taking Governor Christopher Waller, for his word. And last week he said he anticipates 3 to 4 rate cuts in 2025. That's obviously a shift from what we saw coming out of the dot plots, which was only for 2 rate cuts.
In mid-December. Right. Yeah.
Right. So I think we're going to hear more dovish rhetoric from the Fed because we had that soft inflation print, and because looking further out over the horizon, we can see that the flood of supply coming onto the U.S. housing market's going to continue to be kind of a gravitational pull on shelter inflation. It takes about 5 to 6 quarters, and that's the stickiest part of inflation is shelter, but it's turned. And according to the Cleveland Fed's own calculations, it looks like by the end of 2025, we're going to see shelter inflation closer to 2%. And that's 46% of your core PCE. Hence, more rate cuts than what we had thought as recently as mid-December.
So you realize that your forecast and your opinion is different from your friend Keith McCullough, who says, yeah, we've got inflation in cocoa and corn and coffee and so on. As he sees it.
There are pockets of inflation. There are pockets of inflation. That's undeniable. But we're not going to see a repeat of auto insurance rates rising. I mean, you have to bring that to insurance regulators and get special permissions to do that. We are going to see a continued increase in homeowners insurance, absolutely, after what happened with natural disasters. But by the same token, 20% of FHA mortgage delinquencies right now are attributed to not being able to contact the individual with the mortgage. So we're seeing investors start to walk away from their homes, and we've got 1.34 million apartments in the pipeline coming out here in 2025, 2026. Again, you can have pockets of inflation all you want. If something that's 46% weight of the core CPI is coming down, it's really hard to fight that force because it is damn near half the core CPI.
Okay, fair enough. Now you see ugly jobs coming in the U.S. and maybe even a recession. Why?
Well, I think that the powers that be are telling us, by way of revisions to past payroll reports, that recession started. So, I mean, we had private job creation in the year ended June 30, 2024, cut in half from 2.4 million to 1.2 million. And we have further revisions to come. Bloomberg Economics and I happen to agree that job cuts, once we see the dust settle on the revisions, likely started in April of 2024. Again, this isn't my forecast. It's just what we're seeing play out in the data as the revised data are released with a huge lag. Do the markets care? No, they're going to pay attention to headline payrolls. And that's how bond traders behave. But I will say that you have to pay attention to the fact that prior to the CPI report, you had a huge short position in treasuries. That unwound pretty quickly after that cooler than expected CPI report came out, and you saw an air pocket open up underneath the 10-year yield.
Right. The 10-year came down for sure. And just lastly, Danielle, speaking of the markets, you think it's a crowded narrative right now, and you want to. What are your thoughts on that?
It is a crowded narrative, and that's why you have melt-ups, because you cannot get in the way of passive investing and the structure of passive investing being a price agnostic buyer. And it doesn't matter if the stock of NVIDIA is going up. If you get a marginal dollar of inflow into an exchange traded fund that trades based on market value, that dollar doesn't care what the price of NVIDIA is. It just buys it. So until you have a shift in that structure, which is much different than 1987 or even 2000, before passive was the dominant force that it is, it takes a lot more to turn a market. But when the likes of Goldman Sachs comes out with a report that's titled Price to Perfection, a sell-side firm, saying that we're in the 93rd percentile of valuations and dated to 1928, that's a whole nother dynamic, because sell-side firms recognizing overvaluations a lot different than having a quiet private conversation with your financial advisor.
Right. Make some good points for sure. Always great information, Danielle. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Danielle DiMartino Booth, she is the CEO of QI Research.